Welcome to the RJLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to discuss Europe's energy crisis. I want to make today's podcast into three parts. In the beginning, I want to discuss a little bit the background that has led to today's crisis. Then I want to analyze a little bit the current situation. And finally, I want to talk about the resolution, or rather the aftermath of today's energy crisis in Europe. The backgrounds are, first let's start with the background. Backgrounds, I think really there are two aspects. One is the energy mix. The other is the reliance on the energy sources. The most important, in my opinion, is the fundamental reason that Europe today is suffering from an energy crisis is its energy mix. Europe as a continent is not very rich in a lot of the fossil fuels. So it needs to import a lot of the fossil fuels that it wants to consume, that it needs to consume. So this needs to be considered in configuring its energy mix. And in my opinion, even though I'm not an expert in energy security, I think for a country to function properly, to have a solid foundation for a country's industries, it is important to have an energy mix that provides redundancy and stability. And I think the big mistake in Europe in the last 2 decades in particular has been the overemphasis on the so-called green technologies, while at the same time overlooking the security and viability of the continent's energy mix. And specifically, I think there has been an overinvestment in wind technology, wind electricity generation. Because from where I live, there are many wind electricity generation power stations, whatever they're called. And even though it is true that I never go out when it is extremely windy, I've never seen any of those windmills really move. Not really. From close to where I live. Yes, there are other parts of France where I passed by, where I did see some of the wind power generators were moving. But I'm giving this anecdote to give you an idea that there's a lot of, in my opinion, overinvestment in wind power. Simply because wind power is different than a lot of the other power generations, in that you could indeed place your wind power station anywhere you like, but if it is a place that does not get windy most of the year, it's not going to be working. It's going to be staying idle most of the time, and perhaps the maintenance is going to be more than the benefits from the electricity that the station can generate. Right? You need to place it where the local weather gets windy a lot. But at the same time, you also need to keep in mind that those windmills also have a problem in that they can't generate electricity when it is too windy. So you can't put them necessarily in the deep sea, right? Too far into the seabed, unless you build it very big. The bigger you build, the stronger they get, and they can withstand the stronger wind. So that is just I don't think it is a great solution, and certainly not a universal solution, right? There are places where you can place windmills, and it will make sense. But there is a limit to how many places there are, and when those good places are filled, that's the upper limit, that's the ceiling of wind power. You need to find a energy mix that makes sense. That means that you need to also consider other sources that may not be so green to provide the redundancy and security. The problem, of course, is the obsession with carbon dioxide. And I said the last 2 decades, and I think really it has been the past 2 decades where this obsession with the carbon dioxide really went wild, right? And a key moment was, I think, Al Gore's 2000 election campaign. And in his campaign, there was this, in my opinion, really scammy discussion about, I'm not going to say this keyword, but about this temperature thing, right? And if his predictions were true, basically what he was saying was that if George W. Bush were elected, if George W. Bush did not follow his energy policy, global whatever would, I think, cause irreversible damage to the ecosystem. And I think he gave a deadline. It was 5 years or 6 years. Anyway, it was before Bush's presidency would have ended, by the second term. I think 2005, 2006. So the world only had 5-6 years before there will be irreversible. There is going to be it will be so traumatic that a lot of cities, New York, whatever, was going to be submerged by the sea, and all this scare. I was just a trick for him to get elected, and he did not get elected. And this story caught fire, and there are a lot of people who got who really were drawn into the story and became more obsessed with carbon dioxide than anything else, without an appreciation of the evolutionary biology of life on Earth. I don't want to go too deep into that in that direction, but all it suffices to say is that historic terms, we do have a level of a carbon dioxide that is rising, and we are indeed still coming out of an ice age. It was a mini ice age that ended about 8,000 years ago, which was when the human civilization really started. And as we continue to come out of this mini ice age, we know the trend is going to be less cold. And whether you can manually reduce this carbon dioxide and change that is something I think is dubious, because part of the reason of this change of the Earth's natural climate cycles has to do with some astronomical events, right? The way that the Earth rotates on its own axis and around the sun. That's there are, and also as the sun moves around the galaxy, there are basically a lot of factors that are going to be way more important than the small human activity that we have. But nevertheless, I can concede that it is important to be very careful about any emission, not just necessarily of carbon dioxide, but more importantly of other gases and particles that can harm, that can destroy ecosystems and can also harm the health of people who are living in the vicinities. So I agree with that, but this does not explain why Europe has decided to abandon a lot of countries, not completely, but a lot of countries have decided, are abandoning, or have abandoned nuclear power. I think this is one of the major strategic moves that was wrong. Right. On the one hand, there is this overemphasis on green. On the other hand, there is this hatred towards nuclear power. Now, nuclear power can be, in my opinion, it cannot be, or not in my opinion, certainly it cannot be the only source of energy, because nuclear power is not so adjustable, right? You cannot just supply more electricity just on demand, or like tune it down just like that. You need more flexible sources of energy to work in tandem with nuclear power for a really stable and secure energy mix. But what nuclear power is really good at is that it does not emit anything except water vapor. And with current technology, let's not talk about old technology from 4 decades ago, but with current technology, it is really rather secure. It is rather safe. So the idea that you need to get rid of nuclear, I think, is not to be considered at the same time with the goal of going green. You could say, I cut nuclear and I'm starting to burn wood and coal. That may work, but you can't at the same time don't want to burn coal and wood, and at the same time cut nuclear. There is no there is only one other way for you to generate electricity, and also for heating, and that is going to be natural gas. And this leads us to the reliance basically on Russia for gas in Europe. Now, Russia has, I think, the world's largest reserve of natural gas, which is hardly surprising. I think perhaps it also has maybe the world's largest reserve on oil, even though the current current reserves that are already been identified. I think Russia is not the first, but it has such a vast landmass, and I think a lot of Siberia has never been really tapped. So perhaps it also has a lot of oil. But regardless, in Europe there is a strong reliance on Russian gas. It need not be so, right? Because of course Europe doesn't have natural gas. Europe needs to import natural gas. But the fact that Europe needs to import so much natural gas is because of its energy mix. Because a lot of countries are not doing nuclear, right? Germany has closed its nuclear power stations, I think, last year. And France is not really investing a lot in its nuclear energy, and its nuclear reactors are aging. A lot of them are working not at full capacity. And all these basically mean, and the same can be said for a lot of other European countries. And so, and at the same time, they want to meet their, I think personally, ridiculous CO2 goals. So they can't burn coal, they can't burn oil, and by the way, they don't have oil anyway. So what they can do, well, they have to burn natural gas. And so they have to import, and they have to import from Russia because where else can they import it from? And there's this strong dependence. And it is for this reason, to alleviate this the security question for Europe's energy needs. This is why the European leaders, namely Angela Merkel from Germany, the former chancellor, went to Russia and demanded that Nord Stream 2 be built. Europe needed this pipeline because Europe needs a higher amount of natural gas, larger quantity of it to be delivered in order to have a bit of redundancy, in order to have energy security. And this leads us to the current situation. And as I have discussed in one of my earlier podcasts, I think it's number 33. I could be wrong, but I think it's number 33. I mentioned that it is really the reason that UK and US media and the political elite have spent so much of their energy in the last few months to push for this Ukraine story. And in fact, we can go back 8 years. In 2014, I think a large part of the reason why the United States, the State Department, basically managed the coup in Ukraine. I think the main reason was to make sure that Russia and Europe are kept at a distance, right? They want to ensure that Europe are firmly under their own control. And they want to ensure that Europe does not have energy security. They want to ensure that Europe has instead energy reliance upon the United States, and of course military and defense reliance on the United States. And for all these reasons, they have been talking about this Russian invasion, and I think, rightly or wrongly, Russia really did it. And this, I think it's a win for the Americans, but it certainly is a loss for the Europeans. Because now, what they still have is, on the one hand, a heavy reliance on natural gas with no easy alternative, no viable alternative. But at the same time, they have a very shaky relationship with Russia because they have been on board with the Americans, and they have strongly condemned Russia. And so now the big question is what they can do. Now, before answering that question, let's look at other parts of current situations, which of course is that oil prices globally has gone up. The price of natural gas, in particular in Europe, has gone up. The gas reserves and oil reserves are coming down, and the energy security of the European nations are further weakened. I think this is a very, very difficult situation, and the gap of energy supply, natural gas supply, they hope it could be filled with American and perhaps Middle East natural gases, but that needs to be liquefied and needs to be shipped to Europe. And I'm not entirely certain, but I think liquefied natural gas is much less dense than oil. And that what this means is that shipping liquefied natural gas is going to be more costly than shipping oil, which is the reason why people don't really do that, right? So I think that would lead to several-fold increase in the price of natural gas. And that really would present Europe with a really serious question, right? And the question is, how do we change the energy mix in the coming years to ensure our national security? Do we make such changes? Or on the other hand, we keep on going woke until we basically get overthrown, but let's keep some money in the bank and maybe hide it in the Cayman Islands or whatever. And when the revolution comes, we move there. And I mean, that could also be the Bahamas, whatever. That could also be a solution in a lot of these people's minds. Now let's move on to the third part, which is the resolution. I think the best scenario for Europe would be that the military conflict in Ukraine ends quickly. That Russia could gain control of Ukraine really quickly. That's a stable and independent to a large degree, but neutral Ukraine government can be established, and from there on, Russia and Ukraine, with much improved relationships, can work together to maintain the gas pipelines, and gas will be continued to be sent via Ukraine to Europe, so that even though Europe does not receive the extra gas that would come from Nord Stream 2, at least they can have a stable flow of natural gas from Russia via Ukraine. And that will be the best outcome of the current crisis. But in the long term, I would say it is vital for European nations. Let's forget about the European Union. I don't think I think the European Union, I hold them in very low regard, the bureaucrats. So let's just say the nations. Germany, for example, needs to be really careful, and I think there needs to be a national rethinking. I think Germany needs to build a lot of nuclear power plants. Germany needs to, at the same time, also start researching, deploy some of the coal plants. I think Germany still has some coal, right? Build some coal plants, but using more advanced technologies to make sure that the emissions are low, right? And then you can develop a carbon capture, whatever, if you so desire, so that the amount of excess carbon dioxide that is emitted can be captured. So basically, the idea is to have more control over your own energy security, rather than completely relying on an external source, whether it's Russia or it is your boss, right? So that is the best situation. The worst situation is that there will be a prolonged conflict, that the gas infrastructure in Ukraine can be destroyed, and there can be some long-term instability in the region as well. Well, what that directly would lead to is that global oil price would continue to skyrocket. The gas price, of course, gas price too, and now that the pipeline may be compromised, Europe can really face a cold and dark, winter, let's say maybe next winter, it could be a cold and dark winter for a lot of people. And that will be really bad, and it will severely compromise the competitiveness of Europe's industries, and it will lead to the already deindustrialized region to be even more deindustrialized. There will be a lot of the companies who are just getting by, or some companies who are still competitive with, let's say, energy cost of last year, or maybe right now, would not become competitive in relation to their, let's say, Asian or North American competitors. And what's going to happen then is that the rule of market is going to trump the rule of woke, and that will lead to a poorer, a smaller economy, and ultimately lower standard of living. That will be the worst, right? And I think, as I repeat, the solution to Europe's current problem needs to address the fundamental reason, the source of its current crisis. And I believe the fundamental reason is the energy mix. I believe for Europe to have energy security, it must let go of this woke energy idea, right? Needs to stop talking about, stop thinking too much, stop overemphasizing. You can talk about it, right? But stop overemphasizing so-called quote-unquote green or quote-unquote eco that are not a reliable source of energy, right? When you are going cold, what do? Do you set up a bonfire? Or do you say, well, this is burning wood and it's really bad for CO2? No, I'm going to freeze. So that's a realistic question that needs to be answered. I think nuclear power is the answer. I think nuclear power needs to be very high on the agenda. And I also think that instead of using electric vehicles, this is my long-term belief. I think Europe needs to invest more on hydrogen vehicles, because you see, it's very beautiful, right? When you have water, you have nuclear power plants. With nuclear power plant generating electricity, you can have an abundance in nuclear capacity, right? And when the demands are low, usually during the night, you can start using your excess electricity to do dialysis of water, and then you will get hydrogen. With hydrogen, you can then fuel a lot of the automobiles. It is, of course, it requires an investment in infrastructure, but not more than electric vehicles. And at the same time, it could be self-sufficient, because with nuclear power, you don't need a lot of resources. And with hydrogen, you can just get water. You can make hydrogen from water, from electrolysis. So I think that could be the solution. But will they do it? I think it is very likely that Europe needs to experience at least one cold and dark winter before people come to their senses and realize that wokeism is leading nowhere, and you can be woke when you are asleep, but in the real world, you need to respect the realities. So I hope some of the points that I've made in this podcast are interesting to you, or maybe you like it. So please, give this podcast a thumbs up, or a share, a subscribe, and I wish you a great day.